I, little bit of job here. I started buying and selling stuff, basically educated myself. And then I'd always been buying and selling stuff. My dad had a little coin shop, and I wanted a pawn shop.
Most viewers think they know Rick Harrison, the sharp-tongued negotiator, the calm center of chaos inside the gold and silver pawn shop, the man who built Pawn Stars into one of the most recognizable brands in the world. But behind that empire lies a story far more complex, far darker, and far more heartbreaking than anything viewers ever saw on television. Because the truth is this: Rick Harrison didn't just build an empire, he survived one. A rise marked by scandal, betrayal, government pressure, lawsuits, and personal tragedy that nearly brought everything crashing down. Today, we uncover the secrets Rick never wanted out, the deals that went wrong, the family fractures that never healed, and the skeletons buried deep beneath the glittering success of his multi-million-dollar empire. What was the real cost of becoming America's most famous pawnbroker? And how did Rick keep the truth hidden for so long?
Wanting to find out how much it was worth.
Thing looks crazy. What is it?
It's a black widow.
Is it poisonous?
The empire no one believed in. Rick Harrison likes to tell the story of how the pawn shop began as something simple. Just a dusty storefront in a rough part of Las Vegas, filled with used electronics, jewelry no one wanted anymore, and a handful of hopeful customers looking for quick cash. But what most people don't realize is how impossible the dream really was. Rick wasn't just trying to run a business. He was building a lifeline. The pawn shop was born from years of instability, financial desperation, and a family history marked by struggle. His father, the old man, had experience in business, but even then, the odds were stacked against them. Las Vegas in the late 80s and early 90s was not the glittering entertainment capital people imagine today. Crime was everywhere, competition was brutal, and pawn shops were viewed as places of last resort, not legitimate enterprises. Rick fought not only for customers, but also for respect, something no one was willing to give him at the time. Behind the scenes, the stress was relentless. Bills piled up, the shop barely survived, and Rick, still young and unsure of his future, carried the weight of keeping everything afloat not just for himself, but for an entire family. Yet even in those moments of desperation, he had a vision no one else could see. He believed the shop could become something bigger, something that didn't just serve locals, but the entire world. The idea sounded ridiculous at the time, even to those closest to him. But Rick pushed forward anyway, taking risks that put everything on the line. The question was, could the dream survive the realities lurking inside Las Vegas and inside his own family? And what secret decision did Rick make behind closed doors that would change the future of the pawn shop forever? The birth of a TV empire and the price behind it. When Pawn Stars finally became a reality, most people assumed it was a sudden stroke of luck, a quirky idea pitched to a network that turned into overnight success. But the real story is far more complicated and much darker. Rick had been trying to get the shop on TV for years. Every producer rejected him. Every network said no. They called it boring, too niche, not Hollywood enough. By the time the History Channel expressed interest, Rick had already sacrificed years of time, energy, and money, chasing a dream no one believed in but him. And when that first camera crew stepped into the shop, the tension was so thick it was almost impossible to hide. Family members argued. Employees walked out. The stress of national exposure magnified every existing problem. The world saw a tight-knit team: Rick, Corey, Chumley, and the old man, laughing, bargaining, and making impossible deals. But backstage, the strain was intense. The sudden fame brought jealousy. Money created fractures. And Rick became the center of it all. forced to play boss, peacekeeper, and TV personality at the same time. But the most surprising truth is this: when Pawn Stars exploded in popularity, Rick didn't gain control. He lost it. Deals were rewritten. Contracts changed. Other forces, legal, financial, and corporate, tightened their grip around the brand he had built from scratch. Even Rick admitted privately that he didn't recognize the monster Pawn Stars had become. Yet he kept going, because turning back meant losing everything. But what major betrayal from someone inside the pawn shop nearly destroyed the entire show from within? The betrayal no one saw coming. As Pawn Stars grew into one of the most successful reality shows in history, Rick Harrison found himself surrounded by people he thought he could trust. Family members, longtime employees, even friends who had been by his side since the early days of the shop. But fame doesn't just change a business. It changes the people inside it. Slowly, quietly, the cracks started forming. Corey, Rick's son, struggled under the pressure of living in his father's shadow. He wanted more control, more recognition, more say in how things worked. Chumlee, once the goofy comic relief, became an overnight fan favorite, something Corey resented deeply. And behind the scenes, Chumlee's rising fame created complications that the cameras never showed. Appearances, endorsements, and outside deals were suddenly part of the equation. Everyone wanted a piece of the spotlight, and tensions that had once been nothing more than workplace disagreements exploded into full-scale conflicts. But the worst betrayal didn't come from the cast members fans knew. It came from someone far closer. Someone Rick never expected to turn on him. A dispute over business ownership, money flow, and decision-making rights erupted into a legal nightmare. The empire Rick had spent decades building was suddenly under threat from inside his own family. The emotional toll was immense. Rick wasn't just fighting for a business anymore. He was fighting for his name, his legacy, and his relationship with the people he loved. For a man who projected confidence on television, Rick was privately unraveling. The cameras captured the deals, the laughs, the negotiations, but they never captured the late nights, the meetings with lawyers, the frustration of realizing that the people you trust most are the ones capable of hurting you the deepest. And the biggest question lingered over everything. If Rick couldn't trust the people inside the pawn shop, who could he trust at all? The scandals that threatened to end everything. With fame came money, and with money came scrutiny, more than Rick ever imagined. Suddenly, the pawn shop wasn't just a small Las Vegas business. It was a global brand. Millions watched every week. Journalists dug into records. Agencies audited numbers. Lawyers combed through paperwork. And for the first time, Rick realized that everything he had built was exposed to the world. One scandal after another hit the headlines. Legal battles involving former employees. Investigations connected to the pawn shop's operations. Public accusations that forced Rick to defend himself in ways he never wanted to. Every misstep, no matter how small, was magnified, exaggerated, and twisted into something bigger. Chumlee's highly publicized legal trouble nearly ended the show altogether. Production was halted. Networks hesitated. Advertisers watched closely. Rick had to stand in front of executives and convince them that the brand wasn't tainted beyond repair. At the same time, Rick's personal life was unraveling under the pressure. Divorces, strained relationships, and the loss of privacy wore him down. The weight of being the face of the show, of being the one expected to keep everything together, grew heavier than ever. Every day felt like walking a tightrope between maintaining the polished image fans saw on TV and managing the emotional chaos that defined his real life. The pawn shop itself became symbolic of his internal struggle. Each deal, each negotiation, each customer, walking in with something valuable or worthless, became a reminder of how unpredictable life had become. Rick tried to pretend everything was fine, but behind closed doors he was exhausted, emotionally drained, financially stretched thin, and constantly looking over his shoulder. The empire was shaky. His personal life was cracking, and critics were waiting for him to fail. But what happened next would push Rick into the darkest chapter of his life, one that changed him forever. The loss that broke Rick forever. For all the business battles, scandals, and tension inside the pawn shop, nothing compared to the moment that shattered Rick's world completely. It wasn't something tied to television ratings, contracts, or legal filings. It was deeply personal, so personal that even fans who followed Rick for years were stunned into silence. The death of his son, Adam Harrison, was the kind of tragedy no parent is ever prepared for. When the news broke, headlines spread instantly, but what they didn't show was the raw human devastation behind the story. Rick wasn't just a reality TV star in that moment. He wasn't a businessman or a pawnbroker. He was a father, one who would have traded his entire empire, every dollar, every ounce of success, just to rewrite that one terrible day. Rick had lived his entire life as the tough one, the man who didn't crack, who kept pushing, kept building, kept fighting. But losing Adam cracked him wide open. The grief was overwhelming, consuming him in ways he never expected. This wasn't something he could negotiate, or fix, or restore like an antique on the show. This was permanent, final, unchangeable. And almost immediately, Rick felt the world closing in. Reporters circled. Social media became ruthless. Rumors spread faster than facts. People speculated, judged, debated, without understanding that a man was grieving the unthinkable. Inside the pawn shop, everything changed. Rick struggled to show up. The once familiar aisles and counters felt haunted. Every corner reminded him of the days Adam spent there as a young boy, helping out, laughing, dreaming of his own future. The shop that once felt like Rick's kingdom suddenly felt like a museum of everything he had lost. Family tensions worsened. Old wounds reopened. Private disagreements turned into public whispers. For the first time in his career, Rick didn't know how to move forward. Not as a businessman, not as a father, not as a man trying to hold himself together. And the world began to ask the same question Rick was asking himself. How do you rebuild your life when the part you loved most is gone forever? The pawnshop empire on the brink of collapse. With his personal life in turmoil, Rick returned to the gold and silver pawn shop, hoping that work might offer some form of normalcy. But instead, he found a place spiraling in ways he had never imagined possible. The pawn business had already been struggling under pressure from rising operational costs, increased competition, and the slow decline of brick-and-mortar retail. Then came internal fractures, staff turnover, disagreements behind the scenes, and pressure from producers trying to stretch the show into new seasons, even as the chemistry that once made it magic began to fade. The loss of his son had left Rick emotionally and mentally drained, and the shop began to reflect that. Paperwork piled up. Decisions were delayed. Deals that Rick would once have handled with razor-sharp instinct suddenly slipped through the cracks. Customers noticed, employees noticed, and the network noticed most of all. Ratings fluctuated. Filming schedules became strained. Execs began quietly considering whether Pawn Stars could survive without Rick at full strength, or whether the show should end entirely. And as if that wasn't enough, new legal issues emerged at the worst possible time. Financial disputes surfaced, including conflicts related to family members and the show's revenue structure. Rumors circulated that certain cast members were planning to split from the franchise, leaving Rick to manage the fallout alone. The shop, Once the beating heart of Rick's empire felt like it was crumbling. Every day brought a new crisis, whether it was production drama, business stress, or the heavy silence of grief Rick carried with him like a weight on his shoulders. Even Chumley and Corey, despite their long history with Rick, could feel the shift. The laughs came less easily. The old camaraderie felt forced. The cameras captured smiles, but off-screen the mood was different. Somber, uncertain, fragile. For the first time since opening the doors in 1989, Rick wondered if the pawn shop might truly be slipping away from him. And even more frightening was the question he couldn't escape. If the empire fell apart, what would Rick have left? The lawsuit that threatened to destroy everything. As the storm around Rick Harrison intensified, another blow emerged, one that would strike at the very core of his reputation and financial stability. Lawsuits were nothing new in the entertainment industry, but this one wasn't about contracts, royalties, or reality TV disagreements. It was far more personal and far more damaging. The legal battle began quietly, almost unnoticed by the public. But when the story finally broke, it spread like wildfire. Headlines dipped into sensationalism, reporting the most dramatic angles possible. And suddenly Rick found himself painted in the harshest light. For a man who had built decades of trust with viewers and customers, the accusations felt like a direct attack on his character. Behind the scenes, the pressure was suffocating. Lawyers met with him daily, combing through documents, emails, financial records. Every shade of his professional and personal life laid bare under a microscope. The stress began to bleed into everything, from his daily interactions at the pawn shop to the exhausting filming schedule for Pawn Stars. And for Rick, the timing couldn't have been worse. Still grieving, still trying to hold a crumbling empire together, he now had to fight another battle on a front he never wanted: the courtroom. Employees noticed the strain. He looked tired, withdrawn, sometimes even defeated. Words rarely associated with the man who had spent years outsmarting sellers, negotiating deals, and maintaining authority both on camera and off. The confident Rick fans knew was being slowly chipped away. The lawsuit became a shadow that followed him everywhere. At home, he couldn't escape it. At work, it was impossible to ignore. On set, producers whispered about contingency plans. Online, speculation grew darker by the day. It didn't matter whether the claims were exaggerated, twisted, or misinterpreted. Public perception is a powerful beast, and once it turns, it rarely stops. Rick realized he was no longer fighting to save just his business. He was fighting to save his name. But the most unsettling part was what he began to wonder privately, the question that kept him awake at night. Was this lawsuit the breaking point that could finally bring down everything he had ever built? Pawn Stars? Without Rick, the unthinkable becomes possible. For more than a decade, Rick Harrison wasn't just the star of Pawn Stars. He was its backbone. The shop, the deals, the history lessons, the witty negotiation battles. Rick's presence held everything together. But as the storms in his personal life grew heavier, something began to shift behind the scenes. Producers who once depended on Rick started quietly discussing alternative strategies. Meeting rooms filled with uncomfortable questions that no one ever expected to ask. Could the show survive without him? Could Corey step into the lead role? Could Chumley carry the comedic energy on his own? Could the gold and silver pawn shop remain the heart of the franchise if its main figure wasn't there to steer it? Fans noticed Rick's absences. Some episodes featured him less. Others relied more heavily on the supporting cast. At first, people assumed it was scheduling. Then they assumed it was grief. Then they started to worry. Inside the shop, morale began to slip. Longtime employees whispered about what would happen if the show ended. Would the store still attract thousands of visitors a day? Would the team scatter to other ventures? Would years of work, fame, and dedication suddenly evaporate? Rick felt the weight of that uncertainty every time he stepped through the shop's doors. The place used to feel alive, buzzing with energy, negotiations, and the thrill of never knowing what treasure would walk through the door next. Now, much of that magic felt muted, overshadowed by the possibility of an end no one had truly prepared for. And the more producers pushed for answers, contracts signed, schedules guaranteed, commitments renewed, the more Rick realized something painful. He didn't know if he had the strength to keep carrying the show the way he always had. Rick wasn't giving up, but he was tired, emotionally, mentally, physically drained by the storms of the last few years. And somewhere deep inside, a new question began forming, one he never thought he'd ask. Could Pawn Stars, the show he built, actually move on without him? And if it did, what would become of Rick Harrison? Long before Pawn Stars became a global hit, Rick Harrison learned one harsh truth. Fame doesn't just magnify success, it magnifies every secret you hoped would stay buried. And once the cameras rolled, those secrets became harder and harder to keep hidden. What viewers saw on television was a carefully curated version of Rick's world. The shop looked organized, the team harmonized, the deals unfolded with charm and humor. But behind the scenes, Rick faced constant battles, business disputes, employee tensions, financial risks, and relentless pressure to maintain a flawless public image. What fans never realized was how often Rick had to intervene before filming even started. Some sellers arrived demanding to be paid just to appear on camera. Others brought forged documents, fake stories, or staged emotional sob stories, hoping to get a better offer. Rick became the gatekeeper, rejecting scams, protecting the integrity of the show, and shielding producers from the mess that reality TV never wanted to show. But the biggest secret of all wasn't about the items, it was about the people. For years, Rick carried the responsibility of managing personalities who didn't always get along, who sometimes feuded off camera, who questioned the future of the show, or who quietly resented the fame that came with it. Arguments happened. Contracts were disputed. Some cast members threatened to quit more than once. And every time, Rick had to step in, calm the situation, and keep the machine running. Yet even with all that pressure, Rick never cracked publicly. He never exposed the tension. He never pushed back on the narrative the network wanted. That Pawn Stars was a fun, easygoing workplace where history and humor collided effortlessly. But the cracks were there, and they were getting harder to hide. Because as Rick's personal life grew darker, legal battles, the loss of his son, financial strain, the burden became too heavy. Some crew members whispered that he looked like a man aging faster than his years. Others said he seemed more irritable, more distant, more exhausted by things that once rolled off his back. And then came the moment Rick feared most, whispers of a network expose. Journalists started digging, not into the items, not into the shop, but into Rick himself, his past, his business decisions, his private life. They wanted the story behind the story. Rick realized he had two options: expose the truth on his own terms, or wait for someone else to twist it for him. But the question haunting him was simple. If everything came to light, would the empire he built survive the truth? No one, not Corey, not Chumley, not the crew, not even fans who had watched him for over a decade, knew just how close Rick came to walking away from the show completely. It happened quietly, far away from the cameras, in a sterile boardroom overlooking the Las Vegas Strip. Producers had called an emergency meeting. Ratings were shifting. Contracts needed renegotiation. And with mounting legal issues and public scrutiny, Rick was no longer seen as the infallible cornerstone of the franchise. For the first time, the network questioned his reliability. And for the first time, Rick questioned whether the show was worth the pain. The meeting lasted hours. Voices were raised. Tensions were thick. Producers pushed for tighter schedules, bigger storylines, and more emotional drama. They wanted Rick on camera more, despite the fact that he was still grieving, still battling lawsuits, still holding together both a business and a brand that was starting to buckle under pressure. Rick listened quietly at first, letting them talk, letting them propose ideas that felt more like demands. But eventually, something inside him snapped. He stood up, and for the first time in his entire relationship with the network, Rick Harrison said the one thing they never expected to hear. "Maybe it's time Pawn Stars moves on without me." The room fell silent. Producers froze, unsure whether he meant it, unsure whether he was bluffing, unsure whether the show could actually function without him. In that moment, everyone realized the truth. Rick Harrison wasn't just another cast member. He was the show. But Rick wasn't bluffing. He felt broken, physically exhausted, emotionally drained, spiritually crushed by the endless crises that piled onto his shoulders. For him, walking away wasn't a threat. It was a genuine escape route. After the meeting, Rick sat alone in his car for nearly an hour. He didn't turn the engine on. He didn't make a call. He just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, wondering when his life had become so heavy that even success felt like a prison. He asked himself questions he never imagined he'd face. If he quit, would he feel relief or regret? If he stepped away, would fans understand or turn on him? If Pawn Stars ended, what would he have left? But the darkest question, the one he couldn't shake, was this: had the show taken more from him than it ever gave? The lawsuit that shook the empire. Just when Rick Harrison thought he had endured the worst life could throw at him, another blow arrived. One that didn't just target him emotionally, but struck directly at the foundation of his business, his reputation, and everything he'd built over decades. This time, it came not from the media, not from the network, not from cast drama, but from somewhere far more devastating: his own family. The lawsuit hit the headlines instantly, spreading faster than Rick could respond to it. Words like fraud, mismanagement, and deception were splashed across articles and talk shows. To the public, it looked like the empire of the Pawn Stars patriarch was finally cracking. But to Rick, the pain was deeper than any headline could capture. Because a legal battle against a stranger is business, a legal battle against blood is heartbreak. Those closest to him saw the toll it took. Rick walked into the shop quieter, heavier, carrying the weight of a man who had been betrayed by the very people he once fought to protect. Employees whispered that they hadn't seen him this defeated since the day the old man died. Behind closed doors, Rick wrestled with emotions he rarely let himself feel: guilt, anger, disbelief, and something even darker: a fear that maybe, just maybe, all of this was punishment for years of pushing too hard, sacrificing too much, and putting the show above everything else. He tried to keep business running as usual. He signed autographs. He filmed episodes. He smiled for fans. But his eyes told the truth, a truth the cameras could never fake. Every time Rick opened a newspaper or refreshed his phone, he saw accusations that suggested the man millions trusted was actually a villain. And even if he believed the claims were exaggerated or false, the damage was done. His empire no longer felt indestructible. Networks noticed the stress. Producers whispered concerns. Crew members wondered how long Rick could realistically continue under this pressure. But the question that lingered like a shadow was this: if the empire Rick built was now fighting against him, who was left on his side? In the end, the story of Rick Harrison isn't just about a pawn shop, a TV show, or even an empire built from grit and street-smart instincts. It's the story of a man who rose higher than anyone expected, only to face battles far tougher than anything he ever negotiated across a pawn counter. Fame changed his life. Success elevated his name. But tragedy, pressure, and loss carved deeper into him than the world ever realized. Behind every episode we watched, behind every laugh, every deal, every confident smirk, there was a man carrying more weight than anyone could see. The heartbreak of losing his father, the unimaginable pain of losing his son, the lawsuits, the headlines, the stress, the fear, the exhaustion. Rick Harrison didn't just run a business. He survived one blow after another while millions believed he was unshakable. But maybe that's the lesson hidden inside Rick's story. Even the strongest people break. They just hide it better. As fans, we see the show, but we rarely see the cost. So if this chapter of Rick Harrison's life teaches us anything, it's this. Check on the people who seem the toughest. They may be fighting the hardest battles of all. Thank you for watching, and if you want to support stories like this, stories that reveal what really happens behind the fame, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and let us know in the comments who you want us to cover next. Because sometimes, the people we think we know the most still have truths left unseen.